recession becomes somewhat smaller. But what is now happening, the gangsters like Mr. Ben Bernanke and Mr. Larry Summers and Mr. Tim Geithner, they take the smaller pie but allocate a larger portion of that pie to their friends on Wall Street and in the banking sector and to very questionable organizations like AIG and so forth, at the expense of decent people who work in America.
So where is it all heading? I mean, you talk about them hiring more policemen to protect themselves.
I was recently interviewed by Barron's, which is a leading financial paper. I said, we are all doomed. It's going to end in a complete disaster. But we have to distinguish. The disaster may not happen for 5 to 10 years, but we're heading into an iceberg. And what will eventually happen is that the population will suffer very badly from inflation and declining real wages. And the establishment, including the government, will protect itself. And when everything becomes very bad, and you have simultaneous, essentially a recession, depression, like you said, in unemployment is of course higher than 10%. I don't think it's 22%, but say maybe 15%. When that doesn't improve, they'll go to war. And nobody can pay for the war, so you print more and more money, and you have hyperinflation, and then the system goes. That's why I'm telling everybody, you ought to own some land, and you ought to own some stocks, and you ought to own some gold or a lot of gold and other precious metals, because paper money and bonds are very vulnerable over the next 5 to 10 years.
Absolutely. I mean, this is a giant black hole of debt that's mathematically impossible to get out of. And the system...
I have made the calculation. I don't want to bore you with everything. But when you consider debt to GDP, 375%, but that excludes the unfunded states' liabilities, the unfunded liabilities arising from Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security that are coming due. I mean, the hole is so big, we are doomed.
And that's what the private central banks set up. They take over the world with fiat currency and credit they put out. While it still has value, they buy up the media, the military, the assets, the gold. They bring in a cashless society after they bankrupt it all. And the entire world is a giant scientific police state, Dr. Faber. That is clearly from all of their own documents, their own statements. This has been a premeditated, as you said, concerted, coordinated, master economic domination. What Napoleon, Hitler, and Julius Caesar couldn't do, the private banks have done unless we identify them as the criminals and bring them to justice. But even if we were to stop them today, they have irrevocably savaged us so bad. Is there any way to get out of this New World Order?
Well, first of all, I don't think so, because I have to also say there's no political will, because, as you say, the U.S. Federal Reserve is actually a corporation. In other words, it's a private entity, and it's most likely owned by all the banks in the United States. But the point is, there were voices in the United States that rightly asked for the Federal Reserve to be audited. But why do they refuse to be audited? If you have a business and someone comes along and says, listen, we want to audit you because we want to do business with you, then you say, sure, if you have nothing to hide. But if you have something to hide, you say, I refuse to be audited. So I think the Federal Reserve is, first of all, 99% responsible for the NASDAQ bubble and the subsequent crash. 99% responsible for the debt build-up and subsequent housing crash. And 99% responsible for having misled people who simply from their education cannot make a decision about how much leverage they use when they buy a house. Because if you buy a house and you borrow only 50% on your house and the house may drop 50% in value, and your mortgage is still not underwater. But if you borrow 99% or 120%, then you have a big problem. And the Federal Reserve, especially Mr. Greenspan and Mr. Bernanke, encourage people to take second home loan mortgages and
sir, Dr. Faber, we're almost out of time, so I'm interrupting. And so now here we are, and their media is still putting out the hype that people's housing loans caused this. They baited and switched day one with the bailout money and didn't use it for that and said, we're not going to tell you where it's going. They're clearly out of control. Congress is talking about not reapproving the nomination of Bernanke for another term. They're talking about indicting Geithner or making him leave, but then you just get rid of sacrificial goats. We need to go after the entire system, or as you said, we are doomed. And I try to explain that every real economist, Ron Paul, countless economists we interview, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, George Humphrey, they all say mathematically impossible, designed to take over, and you try to tell yuppie reporters this, and they just laugh at you. They think it's funny. They think it's cute. They think it's going to go on forever.
I mean, the problem is that nobody in government and in the establishment wants to face the truth. And even very decent people, they tell you the truth, but they are very diplomatic about the statements they make. They don't say it's inevitable that eventually there'll be a huge mess. They guard themselves very much. But the mainstream and the government officials, they keep on misleading people. That is the problem.
And they know, don't they? I mean, they've designed it.
Well, I'm not sure they know because, the intelligence level of government employees is obviously not very high.
But I meant the bankers, the actual technicians running this.
Yes.
I mean, that's the real government is the banks. Even Congress admits that now.
Well, I mean, the government basically is financed by large corporations and by election campaign contributions and so forth and so on. And then every politician then owes something to the people that gave him money, that brought him into office. And so nothing really gets ever decided. When there is a crack in the building, they don't fix the crack. They just put paint on top of it. And then 2-3 years later, the crack reappears, and they put fresh paint until the whole thing collapses.
Dr. Mark Faber is our guest. Gloomboomdoom.com is his website. Sir, I really appreciate you spending time with us, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
We'll be right back, ladies and gentlemen, with the News Blitz and other guests coming up. You'll definitely want to stay with us today. This transmission is key.
We're on the march. The empire's on the run. Alex Jones and the GCN Radio Network.
Hundreds of nations have fallen to tyranny in the last century alone. This is our last chance to not relive history.
As we're finishing off this agenda, they'll be pulling the rug from underneath Americans at home.
They have tremendous influence on our president and Congress, and they really are calling the shots.
I think it's incumbent upon all of us as American citizens to pay attention.
Fall of the Republic identifies the enemies of our nation, the criminal offshore cartel, hell-bent on destroying sovereignty, and on its ashes constructing world government.
Tim Geithner, Bernanke, they're arsonists. They're asking for more matches. And the Congress is saying, who do we make the check out to?
Today, it seems like nobody does care. And right now in Washington, D.C., we have seen a fall of the Republic.
Get your copy of Fall of the Republic on DVD at Infowars.com or watch it online right now in super high quality at PrisonPlanet.tv. Hundreds of nations have fallen to tyranny in the last century alone. This is our last chance to not relive history.
As we're finishing off this agenda, they'll be pulling the rug from underneath Americans at home.
They have tremendous influence on our president and Congress, and they really are calling the shots.
I think it's incumbent upon all of us as American citizens to pay attention.
Fall of the Republic identifies the enemies of our nation, the criminal offshore cartel, hell-bent on destroying sovereignty, and on its ashes constructing world government.
Tim Geithner, Bernanke, they're arsonists. They're asking for more matches. And the Congress is saying, who do we make the check out to?
Today, it seems like nobody does care. And right now in Washington, D.C., we have seen a fall of the Republic.
Get your copy of Fall of the Republic on DVD at Infowars.com or watch it online right now in super high quality at PrisonPlanet.tv.
Hi, neighbor. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Certainly we'd never intend to procrastinate getting our own food supply until there was none left at any price. We would intend to have plenty of food so the relief organizations could care for those unable to care for themselves. We would intend not to be standing in the bread line with the ignorant and the foolish who pretend the facts of food disappearance are untrue. If the experience of the Katrina disaster is evidence, the bread line may have no bread. Just like the good intentions on the road to that unheavenly place, the good intentions alone to get a supply of food will not feed us. Only getting our food supply immediately will make us independent and fearless for the future. Call